This is one of the several books that he has on the Superpower opportunity, as well as Let's Talk Tax, Carbon Tax, which is fantastic. So what is green industrialisation? Well, it's the superpower opportunity for Australia. We know that the world will shift to post-carbon economies, and we need to be part of that next acceleration. The decarbonisation of steel is responsible for about 11% of global carbon emissions, and it's one that is defining industrial challenges of this decade. Achieving near-zero steelmaking will require coordinated advances in technology, trade and governance, connecting resource-rich exporters like Australia with industrial demand centres around the world. With abundant iron ore reserves and some of the world's most competitive renewable energy resources, Australia has the opportunity to become a leading producer and exporter of green iron, supporting regional jobs, attracting clean investment and contributing to global decarbonisation. And to talk more about the Australia opportunity, I'm delighted to welcome Australia's Climate Change Ambassador, Will Namfakirkis, who will provide some opening remarks. Thank you.
Well, thanks Joanne, and thanks to the Superpower Institute for bringing us together today in this sweltering Belém environment and hosting a discussion on an issue that's really important for Australia. Huge opportunity for us economically, but also a huge opportunity for Australia to contribute to decarbonisation globally. So I thought I'd focus very briefly just on three things. So the first is the importance of this sector and the economic and decarbonisation opportunity. The second is the way the Australian government is really leaning in to support this work and ensure that we seize this opportunity. And the third is our work with international partners. So starting with the first, Joanne, you framed it really well. Export of metals, a real cornerstone of the Australian economy, of our export industry. Our export of metals is valued at around $150 billion each year. World's largest exporter of iron ore. And if you look at the cities around the world, the skylines of the cities around the world, all the steel in those skylines, it's a really good chance, if you're looking at a building, that steel has been made from iron ore that's sourced in Australia, particularly in Asia, particularly in China and across Southeast Asia, but globally. A big chunk of that steel comes from Australian iron ore. We know, however, that minerals extraction and metals manufacturing are responsible for a big chunk of global emissions. So we need to find ways to decarbonise production. And this is where, in Australia, we have some amazing potential synergies. Enormous renewable energy capabilities and enormous metals and iron ore reserves. So bringing those two things together presents a huge decarbonisation opportunity. And that brings me to the second point, which is how the government is leaning in on this. So the government really recognises this opportunity, and it's looking to seize it through our Future Made in Australia plan. So green metals is a priority sector under Future Made in Australia. And a couple of statistics, a couple of dollar figures. So the government's committing $4 billion to support green iron, green aluminium, and the demonstration of novel green metals technologies. Secondly, we all know, and we're going to hear from some of our presenters, that hydrogen is a key input into current green iron production. So the government also remains very committed to green hydrogen and has budgeted nearly $8 billion over 10 years in targeted support for the production of renewable hydrogen. So a lot of what I've talked about has focused on production and the opportunity there, but the other part of the equation is demand. We really need to accelerate global demand for green metals. So that brings me to my third point, which is about international cooperation and the importance of international cooperation to generate demand for green iron and green metals. So the government is also leaning in on this. So in our region, the Indo-Pacific, We're working through our dialogues with Japan and the Republic of Korea to explore cooperation on supply chains for green iron and steel. We also know that China is the world's largest steel producer. It takes about 60% of Australia's iron ore. And during our Prime Minister's visit to China in July, an agreement was reached to establish a steel decarbonisation policy dialogue. And then in Europe, we're working with partners like Germany and the Netherlands on hydrogen and green metals cooperation. So I'll just close by saying COP here in Belém is a really great place to bring this all together. So the economic opportunity and potential for Australia and for our region, the global imperative to address climate change, and the ability of Australia to make a huge global contribution to decarbonisation through green iron and green metals. So I really look forward to hearing what the panel has to say about these topics. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Will. And so much of that work is certainly underpins what we do at TSI. We recognise that we do have a comparative advantage, and we do recognise that we need to transition our economy and certainly our export opportunity, current opportunity to be able to prosper in the future. So I just want to really quickly talk about two pieces of work that we've recently done. The first is new energy trade. I do have some copies up here as well, and down there for those that are interested. But this was written by Dr. Ruben Finnegan late last year. And what we discovered was that major economies will not have enough cheap zero carbon energy to meet their future needs. So this will drive a whole lot of trade in renewable energy. But that renewable energy is expensive and difficult to transport. So we see the opportunity around energy-intensive production will then mitigate to locations where abundant, cheap, renewable energy, which is Australia. We also note that Australia will be very economically advantageous if we start trading in green products this decade, right? And so we also know that that opportunity exists across North Asia, but we also see opportunities across Europe as well. So then this year we released a green iron report. Now we recognise three things. We've got abundant renewable energy, which Will spoke about, and we always speak about it at TSI as well, and we have a lot of iron ore reserves. But the third thing that we also have is industrial experience in mining and innovation. That's a really important one to know. So the three top things that we found for our research is that there is a nearly $400 billion opportunity for export of green iron by 2060 for Australia's economy. That 4% of global emissions can be reduced if Australia goes to green iron. We also found, and Will made mention of this figure as well, that Australia has about $120 billion worth of value in its current fossil fuel exports that are actually at risk as our trading partners start to decarbonise and no longer have that demand for that green iron. So our work suggests that with efficient support, Australia's green iron producers will be able to compete in different areas of the markets. Now, very quickly, I'm going to go through our 5 recommendations and then invite the panel to come along. So the first one that we said is that we don't have an international price on carbon. So we suggested that we create a $170 production tax credit for green iron, which would be inclusive of the government's hydrogen production tax incentive, which Will mentioned as well, for hydrogen-based production, which is the equivalent and other supporting technologies as well. The second recommendation we made is that we need to provide capital support for early producers, worth up to 30% of the capital costs, but capped at around $500 million. The third is support infrastructure to ensure it's provided at efficient scale and at production of low cost. And to unlock private investment. The fourth is Australia's green hydrogen certification scheme to support green hydrogen production in low-cost locations and engage in international diplomatic efforts that create demand for Australia's green iron opportunity. So with those support packages, Australia will be incredibly successful, and the production of growth back of green iron, that was very distracting, will be prosper. So anyway, let's invite the panel up. We've got Richard from Fortescue, John Creets from RMI, Joe Williams from GH2, and let's get started.
Oh, 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 oh. Ah.
This one.
Hello. Test.
All right, let's get to this incredible lineup of speakers. Can everyone hear me? Or is that, yeah, it's on? Fantastic. So what we might do is actually, rather than go through the bios as they stand, I'm going to get each speaker to introduce themselves, their company, and the work that they're doing across this space as well. So Joe, I might start with you.
Great, thanks Joanna, and hi everyone. Joe Williams, CEO of the Green Hydrogen Organisation. We're a non-profit foundation, and we have a number of corporate supporters, including Fortescue. So very happy to be here talking about this important topic.
We'll try this. Maybe we'll try this one. John Kreitz, I lead Rocky Mountain Institute. We're a clean energy think and do tank. We work extensively on green hydrogen, on green steel, assembling demand pool buyers, also looking through different technologies and helping to sort and build those to scale.
Hello everybody, I'm Richard Carsonak from Fortescue. I head up the green metal technology side of the business. A little bit about Fortescue. We are the 4th largest iron ore producer in the world. All our operations are currently in Australia, around 200 million tonnes per year of iron ore. 90% of it goes to China. But Fortescue is working really hard to make Australia a leader in the green industrial revolution, and we want to convert that ambition into real action on the ground. And we are working very hard to deliver that through our decarbonisation of all of our mining operations by 2030, and then the ultimate ambition is to not export iron ore in the future, but to own the problem of scope 3 emissions and convert that all into green iron and send that to the steel industry instead. So thank you for having us here, and great introduction, Joanna and Will.
Thank you.
We're going to use one. Yeah.
We're going to have a hot mic situation here today. Pass the parcel. So, John, I was going to start with, Richard, I was going to start with you because you had the microphone, so we'll pass it back down. But really keen to hear more about what Fortescue is doing in regards to what projects that you actually have here in Oz. Certainly the other areas globally that you're looking at for iron making and how they compare as well, if you're willing to talk about that. And what kind of milestones you've got, and what's next? Like, what is the time frame for Fortescue to start shipping green iron to China?
There's a lot to cover there. So, I mean, because Fortescue produces all that iron ore, the scope 3 emissions that arise from converting that into steel are around 270 million tonnes per year. So we're a significant contributor to climate change in the world. Our chairman, Dr. Andrew Forrest, is absolutely set that we will own that problem and we will solve it and lead the way. And by solving it for our own iron ore and for the problem that we're creating, we hope that will stimulate the change that's needed in the industry going forward. So there are a few things I want to cover. The first is that the steel industry at the moment, when they talk about making green iron or green steel, they generally say that it requires ultra high grade iron ore that you can convert into iron with hydrogen reduction in a single step, convert that into steel in an electric arc furnace. The challenge with that, of course, is that only about 3% of the world's iron ore can do that one-step process. And frankly, none of it really comes from Australia. There's about 5 million tonnes or something from Australia out of 900 million. So what Fortescue is doing, and this is kind of my role, is we need to co-develop the technologies that will enable green iron making with low to mid-grade iron ores. And once we've solved it for our own iron ore, we know that we'll have solved it for the world's iron ore. And it really comes down to, adding an additional processing step. So you first, create your low-grade reduced iron, and then you need to smelt it and refine it so that you can remove all those impurities. So there is definitely a solution. And we are now in the process of constructing a demonstration plant at our Christmas Creek mine site. The intention is to have first hot metal early next year and be fully commissioned by the end of next year. So I like to call that our Mythbusters project. So we want to prove to the world that low to mid-grade iron ores do actually have a properly green iron making and steel making pathway. Prove all the doubters wrong. And so it's really a technical demonstration for us. It's not about the economics. It's about showing that the process actually works, getting meaningful quantities of commercially representative samples to the steel industry around the world for them to test in their steel making processes, give us feedback on how it performs, and then from there we want to really rapidly ramp that up to the ultimate vision actually is 100 million tons per year of green iron from Fortescue. The intention is to do that within the 2040s. So it's a very, very rapid growth. And the intention is to be producing green metal at commercial scale in the very early 2030s and then ramping that up extremely fast. Most of that will happen in Australia. Joanna asked about our international aspirations. I mean, ultimately, making green metal competitively is an energy problem. It is very energy intensive, and it's intensive in terms of creating the hydrogen that you need for the reduction process. There is a lot of energy required to run the process and smelt it. So the key to that is to find the parts of the world that offer really competitive energy solutions. So Fortescue has energy opportunities, projects underway in Brazil, in Morocco, in Egypt, Saudi, Oman. We're looking at a few other places in the world, and then of course Australia is going to be the epicenter of everything that we do. And getting that right will require, not only proving the technology works at scale and it's efficient, it's about accessing really, really competitive low-cost finance. I mean, that's the next biggest driver is not paying 10% cost of capital. So accessing green bonds and building all that into it at very low sovereign rates. Bringing all of the manufacturing and technological might of a nation like China on this pathway with us, not only because they have a world-dominating steel industry, but they manufacture all of the renewable energy equipment, and we need to be able to access that equipment at the scale and at the volumes they can produce it at Chinese pricing, bring it into Australia, build out all this infrastructure, and get that going. So there are many, many moving parts to make this work, but we are 100% confident that it is a solution that's within grasp. We believe that we can compete with grey iron and steel if we can get these assets at competitive rates and if we can get low-cost finance and whatnot. But absolutely, we are committed to it, and you will see it happening. I mean, Fortescue is very much on this path now.
It's a long paddle to pass the microphone down. And I think that's really the great point is you're right, Fortescue is kind of leading this and certainly committed to the technology development as well behind it, demonstrating that it can be done. And we have the technology there to be able to do it and that leadership. We know that first movers often take a little bit more risk than others, so I admire Fortescue's leadership there as well. You spoke a little bit about influencing the kind of global standards and market recognition of green iron and what that looks like. Joe, I'm actually going to go to you for a question because you've just released a standard around green iron. I'm really keen to hear a little bit more about that, but the role that industry plays in advocating for the industry within itself and their leadership.
Great, thanks, Joanna. And it's always wonderful to hear what's happening over at Fortescue. You are a first mover, and there's so much respect we have for you. There. Listen, the Green Hydrogen Organisation has been focused on on standards related to hydrogen for 4 or 5 years. And as the years have gone by, we've realized what we need is product standards, not just for the production of truly low carbon green hydrogen, but we also need a standard for those products that come from green hydrogen. So in our own voluntary industry standard, we have a protocol for things like the production of green ammonia, production of e-methanol, e-methane, because these are all derivatives which will play a part in our economies. And progressively, as we've gone along this road, we've realized there wasn't actually a solid definition of green iron out there. There's been a lot of work done on standards for steel. There's the responsible steel, there's the world steel, there's about 30 or 40 different standards actually, to be honest, and they tend to be across the whole life cycle, downstream up to the actual production of the steel. And what we thought could be additive was to actually come up with a solid definition of a sustainable form of green iron. So the point at which you have reduced and have let's say a metal or a product which is where the next step will be steel making, if you like. And through a process of collaboration with companies, including Fortescue, but also a lot of the organizations probably in this room, TSI, RMI, Agora Industry, many others. We've actually come up with a set of principles. If you're sat down here, you'll see them on your seat, and I'm just going to run through them very quickly. They're available on our website if you want to dive a little deeper. But this is really our attempt to put down a marker to say, if you're going to make green iron, this is what it needs to be about. So first of all, green iron is iron produced with green hydrogen and renewable electricity. Why? Well, simply because that is the sustainable pathway which will help you align with the Paris Agreement. We haven't found any other pathways if you're using virgin iron ore, if you're doing virgin steel making, which will get you Paris aligned. Which leads us on to the second principle, which is we're excluding fossil fuel use within essentially the reduction process. So we all know we're shifting from coal blast furnaces to these new DRI facilities. And of course, those DRI facilities can use natural gas, or they can use hydrogen as well. We don't see the emissions reduction potential of using natural gas in the DRI process as one which is as aligned with climate as needs to be. So we're aware that there are facilities around the world that are doing DRI, that are using natural gas, but for the purposes of these principles, which we're using to advocate to governments, we're actually saying no to natural gas. Now, there's a couple of caveats there. If you're using renewable electricity and there's a little bit of gas backup in the system, that's acceptable under the standard. And as you move up the sort of the steel making value chain, we know that carbon is needed, for example, for carburation and other places too. So there's small roles there, but the bulk use of a reduction agent can't be natural gas within our principles. And then, of course, green hydrogen, we've defined it for a few years. That's hydrogen produced with very low emissions. So we're saying no greater than 1 kilogram of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of hydrogen. The sourcing of that renewable electricity, Richard made the point that there is a lot of renewable electricity that's going to need to go in to the production of the green hydrogen, but also, of course, the production of the production process of the green iron itself. So sustainably sourcing that is key, looking at issues such as geographical and temporal correlation, something which the world is sort of beginning to move towards in terms of sourcing. Another one, which we think is really important, is the environmental, social and governance aspects of extraction itself and of the hydrogen. So our principles include a number of requirements around land use, around water use, around labor, as well as that. And then the final principle is related to certification and book and claim systems. We know that green iron is going to be produced in a few places initially. We hope it's going to be produced in quite a few places in the future, but we need to have mechanisms which allow potentially for a user of green iron to claim those attributes if we don't have the infrastructure immediately to use those attributes in place. So what we're saying is we're open to the idea of a book and claim system, but that system needs to be extremely credible. So, standards underpin the need for product specifications, as the trade hopefully begins to tick up between Australia, China, Korea, Japan. Ultimately, those contracts are going to specify a product. And this, I think, is the first step towards making sure that the product which is specified is truly low carbon.
So let's see. Is that you can hear me now?
Yeah, brilliant. John, and I think this is a perfect time to bring you in because last year RMI released a report, Green Iron Corridors, transforming the steel supply chains for a sustainable future. I'm really keen to learn a little bit more about the work that you're doing at RMI in regards to those value chains and those supply chains and how we can actually unlock that opportunity, not just for Australia, but I think certainly globally as well.
Yeah, well, I think Richard has laid out a little bit of the business case here. You laid out the high-level numbers in terms of what we're talking about. When we think about that 4% of global emissions that we could reduce here, just from Australia, by the way, right? It's about 90% of that is in the direct reduction of the steel or of the iron to the pig iron itself, of the iron ore to the pig iron. And so this is a tremendous step that we can optimize here through hydrogen in that direct reduction process that gives us a much cleaner way in the end that eliminates the greenhouse gases at that scale. I think what this means, though, is if we take advantage of the low costs of solar and we think about where the ore is, we're going to restructure in a green commodity environment what exactly trade looks like here going forward. And for those countries that have either a wealth of renewables or ideally, like Australia, a wealth of renewables alongside ore itself, you can start shipping around direct reduced iron or iron briquette essentially as the global commodity to replace that iron ore in the first place. And so we are looking at and thinking about how trade corridors are going to reshape relative to the overall changes in both decarbonization potential, but also economic potential as we make use of the lowering costs of renewables. And to give you a sense here, if we just take, 20 megatons against or million tons against the 100 million tons of Fortescue that currently travels up to East Asia, right? We can look at by about 2035, based on cost reductions that we see in both electrolyzers and solar, that should be about a $4 billion reduction in overall cost against doing the same thing in East Asia. So Australia is uniquely positioned to take advantage of the improving economics here over time, and those economics become even more compelling as you get further along. If Australia were to produce, instead of exporting, all of its iron ore, if it were to export 50% of its iron ore as iron briquette, that could lead to about 250,000 jobs for Australia and a massive, massive shift in overall dynamics. And we're not just seeing these shifts in dynamics as a potential for Australia. Clearly, Fortescue went through the different countries that it's looking to invest in as other hubs around the world that can potentially either make use of very cheap renewables, access of directly from the ore to the renewables and the transformation, or shift trade routes to these new global centers where you'll see trade pass through in order to make use of that direct reduction process en route to that final conversion to steel in the local markets where probably more of the capital is going to stay put.
And I really like the point you made about the 4% emissions. It's a huge number, but for context, Australia is responsible currently for 1.5 of global emissions. So if we're able to actually reduce by 4%, we're certainly making a very big contribution to decarbonising globally as well. You talked a little bit about trade corridors and the trade routes. I think it's really important to talk just a little bit about trade, because we've seen World Trade Order kind of shift since March this year with some of the announcements in the US, and certainly what that potentially could look like in regards to clean energy trade or clean commodity trade. So really interested for all of the panelists to just make a comment on that as well. I think one of the unique positions for Australia is that we have these existing trade routes directly up to North Asia particularly, and they're in uncontested waters. So it is a direct route, particularly if you think about North Queensland, straight into the ports in Kobe and Osaka, but we also have them across Australia as well. So really keen if you'd like to have a little bit of a chat about the trade corridor piece and what that means in the current geopolitical climate.
Right, thanks. Safer with this one. I've just realised I'm the outlier in this team. We got Joanna, Joe, John, so you're going to have to call me Richard. Otherwise, but I want to make a quick comment just from Joe's green iron standards. I think the nice way to sum it up is the industry needs to start the way it wants to finish. We shouldn't be looking for all these interim pathways and all that kind of stuff. It's just lazy. We know we can do it. We know we can make it economic, and all we're doing is delaying the opportunity by reverting to some form of interim pathway. So coming to the trade corridors, it's a difficult one because obviously without a market, it doesn't really work. And Australia's iron ore goes to the places it goes to because it's consistent in quality. It's not very, very high grade. It's just good, reliable stuff that works well in the Asian steel mills. But once you start to produce green iron, your market is different. Your customers, you're exporting first a lot less material because it's half or a little bit more of the original product. So the logistics cost of it relative to the value of it is much lower. So why not send it to Europe or the US or anywhere else that they may want it? But a lot of the driver of how these markets are going to open up will depend on the commitment of those markets to decarbonisation. If a country or steel industry only wants to decarbonise in 2060 or something, it's quite hard for them to chase after your product unless it's extremely compelling economically. So it's about creating that ecosystem, not only in terms of the demand from the steel industry, but making sure that all the numbers and the systems work. And that's why, as much as I hate using taxes to balance the books, ultimately things like carbon tax is going to make a very big difference. And the Europeans are looking at pricing carbon quite punitively, whereas other nations, maybe in the Eastern Hemisphere, are delaying that process, and that means finding a market for your green products there will just be that much harder because it's harder to balance the books. But we certainly, in our experience, as I mentioned in the beginning, Fortescue sends most of its iron ore to China, so we have extremely strong relationships with the Chinese steel industry, and they are one of those countries that's looking at a 2060 decarbonisation. So for us, it's about working with the steel mills to create a compelling value and use proposition for them, and it's not cost. I tend to get a little bit upset when people go, so what's it going to cost for this green iron? It's what's the green iron worth? It's the value of the green iron you're getting, not the cost of the green iron. And the value is very much a function of what it does for that particular steel producer. Does it unlock the ability to use lower grade scrap or wider scrap kind of qualities? Does it allow them to make better quality steels that they can sell for $5,000 a ton instead of $800 a ton? These are the things you need to understand. And once you understand that equation, you can create that supply chain that makes sense when you're doing your product, particularly in the early days when, let's face it, green metals are going to be more expensive than grey. but that's a transitionary time period, and everything will catch up. But you really have to create that value and use opportunity.
Yeah, so I think Richard's absolutely right here that we need to create demand up front in order to drive, kind of the downward movement in prices in order to make sure that this market kind of incubates in the right way. You can do that at the government level, certainly through carbon taxes, through mutual agreements, and the mutual agreement between Australia and China on dealing with climate change is a big, important step forward in starting to align value chains and think about trade cohering as opposed to disruption when we try to create green commodity markets. We at RMI have also worked pretty extensively with to Southeast Asia as well. That's about aggregating demand that's willing to pay, upfront those higher prices as we migrate toward a lower cost system that's being fueled by some of the declines in technologies that are reducing cost exponentially. It's going to take a little while for us to get to a point where we've actually got the industrial capacity and the scale that's driven to parity. So we need to have the resolve and the coordination in order to make that big step forward that ultimately allows us to harvest not just
Border adjustment mechanism, is sending a signal to the markets in Asia, particularly if they themselves are exporting a product, a car or what have you, to Europe. We've already seen the export of some DRI iron. We don't know the exact details, but which has gone from China to Italy, and we know that was driven by CBAM. So that consideration is coming through, and CBAM comes up in pretty much every conversation I have related to iron and steel. So if that was to be replicated, for example, on an Asia-Pacific scale, that is going to be difficult. We appreciate that, but you can just imagine how much more of an impact it could have. But we need an all-of-the-above approach. I love the buyers platforms that RMI is spearheading, finding those few buyers that are willing to pay a little bit more. Is that the data center builders? We talk a lot about the people who are procuring electricity for data centers, but the data centers also need to be built, and they use steel. And actually, the willingness to pay from those guys is actually also fairly high, and they want the green credentials. So sort of trying to cream off those few willing purchasers to get this market going, I think is going to be key. And then also some bilateral instruments, I think. We've all maybe heard of the H2 Global instrument. There's an agreement between Australia and Germany. And I think including green iron export within that window coming up could be a really good opportunity.
Well, thank you. And I just want to point out that I did not prep them at all to talk about carbon pricing or carbon tax, but that certainly aligns with the Superpower Institute's work. So very, very happy that you all hit that talking point and agree with us that is certainly what we need to take this forward. I think the key message that I just want to leave with before I invite Ambassador Nampakokis back on stage is that, a future made in Australia is one made with our trading partners. We see this as an opportunity to be part of domestic supply chains in Korea, in Japan, and in China. We certainly do not want to take away their existing steel industry. We certainly want to contribute to it and actually create more high-value jobs in those economies as well. See that as an incredible opportunity to not just for both of our economies, but certainly for our long-standing diplomatic relationships with those counterparts as well. So I will invite Will back up on the stage, and I do have a few copies of our reports or the exec summaries for our reports. Enjoy the design of them. Our design team have just won a few awards, so they're very well published and look very beautiful. Please come and grab some, but welcome back, Will.
Thanks, Joanne. Thanks for a really great discussion. Just a few quick observations from me, but I think it was a very practical, real-world discussion. There's a lot of kind of theory and potential here, but you guys have outlined, not just the opportunity, but some of the challenges and how you're working through them. I mentioned at the start two key ingredients that Australia has, renewables and iron ore, and Joanne, you rightly added the third one, industrial expertise in mining and manufacturing. Really point, and I think Richard really sort of picked up on that, demonstrated it, the work of Fortescue, the kind of showing the pathway. I like the idea, the Mythbusters project that you're working on. That's really powerful, and how you're grappling with challenges of that ecosystem, and that ties in with the decarbonisation goals of our international partners. And I think it also ties in with Joe's point about principles for green iron, and this broad question of the sorts of the standards, certification, taxonomy that we need for the green economy, how important that's going to be for stability, certainty, investment decisions and so on, and how we work across jurisdictions to ensure that certainty and that consistency. And then, John, I think you talked powerfully about the economic opportunity and really linked it back to jobs and employment, which is important, including to social license, and really drive home this opportunity point. Really seeing the potential, and again, that's something that the government's really leaning in on. And again, the very powerful point of the contribution that this can potentially make to emissions reduction. And Joanne, you picked up on this. Australia accounts for about 1.2% of global emissions, but the potential for green metals production to contribute even beyond that in terms of global decarbonisation. So, and then this also just comes back to your point, Joanne, that you kind of ended on, which is that a future made in Australia is one made with our trading partners. It's not a future made alone, but so the importance of global ecosystems there. So thanks for a great panel. Look, if you want to continue the conversation, this really important conversation, Australia's Minister for Climate Change and Energy, Chris Bowen, he'll be arriving over the weekend. There'll be a panel, a Green Metals Forum, in which he'll be appearing here on Monday at 2 o'clock, along with Joanne and Richard both. So hopefully that's whet your appetite for that discussion on Monday next week. So thanks again for a great discussion. Thanks for being here, and come along on Monday to continue the conversation. Thank you.